Hey, it's Jeff Gibbons here, and this is going to be a very quick intro to Cubase. So this video is going to be using Cubase Pro 10, but most of the concepts will apply to a lot of the previous versions and probably a lot of the future versions as well. So let's just get right into it with opening a project. So when you open a project in Cubase for the first time, whether you're on a Mac or a PC, you go File, New Project, and it will give you a prompt to find out where you want to put your project. I usually turn off this Use Default Location, and I will go Prompt for Project Location so that I can put my projects in very specific folders. So let's get right to that. I'm going to hit Create Empty. I usually start with a blank project, so let's just find a folder here, make a new folder called Tutorials 2019. And I'm going to call this Cubase Intro Tutorial. And I am making this project folder inside a master folder for all of these projects that I'm doing. And then I click Open for that folder. And the thing you need to understand about Cubase projects is that this .cpr file is your project file, Cubase project file. And it goes into a folder that I've just created for this project, Cubase Intro Tutorial. And you want to make sure that you make a project folder for every project file that you work on. Keeps all the other relevant files for that project inside that folder. And so it's very important to make sure that you don't just put a whole bunch of projects in the same folder. Things can just get kind of messy. So keep it clean, make a new folder every time you make a new project. Okay, so this is the Cubase project window, and you can see that you've got some icons up at the top, and there are more icons that you can see just by choosing them by right-clicking in this gray area up here. But these are some of the more basic ones that I will stick with. Down at the bottom, we've got some transport controls like play and stop. Over here, we've got the metronome. So this is the metronome click on and off, and the key command to turn the click on and off is C. This is what a blank project looks like. On my other screen, I've got a mixer, and you can press F3 to access the mixer quickly. And there's also a way to see things in this lower zone. So if I look right on this icons over in the top right-hand corner, I can see Show Hide Lower Zone. So if I click that button right there, this lower zone opens up, and I can see the mixer in that window if I want. And I can hide that window as well with Command Option B is the key command for that. So if I leave it at the mixer, it'll stay there. And if I leave it as the editor, it'll stay as the editor as well. And later on, we'll see what the editor does. Up at the top of the Cubase window, you can see the ruler. This shows you the grid that you are working with. So right now, our main grid is set to a musical time base. If I click on that and I change it to seconds, you'll see up at the top that the grid now shows us minutes and seconds. So if I zoom out far enough here, I can see this is 1 minute right here. And if I zoom in, you can see seconds and then milliseconds as well. I usually am working with music, so I leave this set to bars and beats, and that makes sure the ruler is set to bars and beats up at the top. We also have a few other things that are important down at the bottom. We've got our tempo, which is 120 beats per minute. So if I press play with the click on, I can hear it clicking at 120 beats per minute. And we can also see the time signature right here. So if I double click right there and type in 3/4, we now have a 3/4 musical bass for the ruler settings up at the top. So if my song was in 3/4 or 6/8, I could do that right there. And we can also have time signature change throughout the song if we want. But we're just going to keep this at 4/4, and we'll leave this at 120 beats per minute for now. This line right here shows you where you are in the song. So I can click up in the ruler up top to move that around. I can click at the beginning. And there's all sorts of key commands you can create to get you back to the beginning. I have a couple of key commands set up so that I can press comma and it'll take me right back to the beginning. If you are on a keyboard that has a numeric keypad, which I'm not here, you can also just use these transport controls, and if you press play, if you press stop again, it will take you back to where you just started from. And that's a feature that I like a lot. So if I want to get back to the beginning, I need to stretch out my transport a little bit down here. So I'm going to go like this, so I can see a little bit more of the transport just with this one little divider right here. So now I can get back to the beginning by clicking that little button right there. And then we also have fast forward and rewind controls now, as well as a loop function, which works between these little white flags called locators. So if I put my mouse up in the very top portion of the ruler, so you'll see these little white flags here, and if I stretch them out, you'll see that this right flag keeps jumping to the next bar. And that right flag is called the right locator, and this is the left locator. And I can set up points to loop between with those locators. So if I press play, jumps right back to the beginning. So that is the locators and the cycle control on the transport down at the bottom. Next thing we should do is just add a track so that you can see what a track looks like in a project. And one thing you can do is just right click in this empty area right here called the track list. Right click, choose add instrument track. Up pops this little dialog, which lets you choose what virtual instrument you want to add. So I am going to just choose one of the default ones that come with Cubase. So let's go down to Synth. And this shows all the list of all the virtual instruments that you have installed on your computer. Let's look at one of the ones that comes with Cubase. Let's look at Retrolog. And I click Add Track, and up pops Retrolog. So now that I've got Retrolog open, I can play it on my keyboard. So just so you know, when you're working with virtual instruments, if you just click on a lot of them, you will find some way to load patches for them. In this case, if you just click on the Retrolog 2 right here, you'll find a list of patches. And in this list of patches, what you can do is just look for different presets for this synthesizer. Another one, dark choir pad. And you can also search for patches by subcategories. So let's try synth pad, and I'll pop all of the patches that are synth pads. Okay, let's stick with this dark choir pad. I really like it. And by the way, I was just arrowing down on the keyboard to go through those different patches. Okay, so once I've got a virtual instrument loaded, there's other ways that we can load virtual instruments as well. Over in the right zone, we can also select virtual instruments, which is a really cool way to do this. And they've got some new functionality in Cubase 10, but let's not worry about that right now. So we're going to call this dark pad. And I can add another virtual instrument just by pressing I is my key command for adding a track, and I've just made that key command in the key commands menu. So I click I, and I'm going to go to, let's go to a drum one, let's go to Groove Agent and hit add track. Okay, and then same thing here, I can just click where it says Kit 1 and up pops my presets. So let's try, let's see, 8-bit kit maybe. Kind of fun. Let's try this one. That's a pretty cool drum kit, so I'm going to go with that. Let's figure out the tempo that I want to put this drum beat into my project. So I'm going to go up to Project, Beat Calculator, and just start tapping the tempo that I was just playing at. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll tap the space bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm at about 82 beats per minute. So I can actually chuck that in right there, or I can go down and just change it right here. Let's go 82 beats per minute and press return. And then now I can play that in. So in order to play and record something in Cubase, so once I'm ready to record, what I usually like to do is just start recording right from where the project cursor is. I press record, and I make sure I give myself a bar of nothing at the beginning of each project. So then I press record. All right, so there's a fun little drum beat in there. I'm going to double click on that now and see what I've got. So I can look at the notes that I just played in this lower zone. There's also a way you can see it in a separate editor. I do like working in this lower zone. It keeps everything kind of connected, and I can usually leave my mixer on my second monitor. But let's have a look at the notes that I played and see what I need to do to fix them. So once I'm in the editor, we need to look at how my notes line up according to the grid which goes with the beats that we're playing at. And you can see that I've got notes in here that should fall right on the downbeat. We've got some that are on the first eighth note in between each beat. And then I've got some that are 16th notes as well. So if I were to set my grid to eighth notes, this note right here would have nowhere to line up to. So what I need to do is make sure my grid is set to 16th notes. And then once I'm in here, I can do something called quantizing, which is where we take these notes and line them up, push them to the appropriate line on this grid. So watch what happens if I select these notes, Command A, and then I press Q, and the notes all move over to the closest 16th note, which is perfect. So now I can look at this. Sometimes you'll have notes that get pushed to the wrong 16th note if you were just a little too early or too late. But let's have a listen to this. Cool. So there we go. We've got a little drum beat played in, and you can see how hard I played each note in this controller lane at the bottom, which is showing velocity information. So velocity is just how hard did you hit the note. And we can adjust that, of course. I can make the notes, these notes down here louder just by clicking right there. And I can fix things as well. I can move things over. If I want two hi-hats right there, I could use the pencil tool to draw in another hi-hat. So if I turn this little icon called snap right here on, what it'll do is it will only allow me to draw notes in according to the grid. If I have that turned off, if I have the snap turned off, I can draw a note in wherever I want. It doesn't have to line up to the grid. I like to keep the snap on most of the time, so I'll leave that set right there, and now we can hear this extra hi-hat. And maybe I want two of these little claps right here. And by the way, instead of going up to this pencil tool, if you're on the arrow tool, you can just right-click and choose the pencil tool right there. Or you can hold Option and have the arrow turn into a pencil, which is the way I work all the time. So you'll see my mouse magically turning into a pencil, whether I'm in the editor or whether I'm up here as well. I can draw new chunks right up top. Okay, so that is working inside what is called the key editor. So this window right here is the key editor. And by the way, if I click on this and I press return, it will open up as well. So there it is, and I press enter or return, closes the window, or you could press Command Option B to get to that lower window. So there's different ways to get down there, and you can make your own key commands for that as well. So let's try playing something with the dark pad, and we'll play something along with this drum beat. Okay, so I'm going to give myself one bar and press record. All right, so I've just played some notes in, and let's have a look at those. There's one little blip right here, which I didn't mean to play, so I'll draw a box around it to select it, and then delete it. And then I'm going to select these notes and press Q to quantize, and that's it. So now those notes are quantized as well. You can see that if I undo that, you can see that these notes did not line up with the grid initially, but if I press Q, they will automatically move. And if nothing is selected, it will just quantize everything. I can also resize the ends of notes by mousing over them and dragging them out. So just like that. I can have them all be perfectly one bar long each. So that is playing notes in, we now have some information on the main page, which I can also mouse over, and you'll see these little boxes appear. And if I grab that little box and move it over, I can resize it. So I can do the same thing right here. Grab this little box, resize it, and then do the same thing on this one. Grab the box, resize it, and grab that box and resize that. And now I can select these two chunks of information, and I can press Command D to duplicate them, or I could select them and then hold Option and drag them over. You're going to always find yourself drawing boxes around things to select things, whether you're in an editor or whether you're on the main page. So that gives me duplicates of the information that I've already played. And if I want to, I could do something like glue these together with the glue tool here. And then I could go back to the arrow tool to double click on them and see that I've got 8 bars of this phrase now, and maybe I could change things up the second time around or whatever I want. Same thing with the drum beat. Maybe add some variation. Let's just talk a little bit more about the layout of Cubase and get your brain around it. So to change names, I just double click right here and I can rename the track. And if I click this little icon in this area called the inspector, I can click this icon and see the virtual instrument again. So we call this icon the toaster, and that's just an easy way to get back to the virtual instrument that you're working on. And this patch is called Ambush of Tigers. So I'm going to call this track Tiger Kit. And if you press Shift Return, if I just press Return, the track name changes, but this chunk of information does not change. So if I press Shift Return after I'm done typing, it will also change the name on this chunk of information, which is helpful to be able to see exactly what you're looking at when you have a project full of information. Another thing is they changed the way to color tracks in the new version of Cubase. So if you want to change the color of your track, click on your track and go up to this little color menu, and you can change it to a different color. So let's go to a bit of a yellow track. And then now if I press F3 to get to my mixer, I can see that the orange track is orange in the mixer and the yellow track is yellow in the mixer. While we're in the mixer, just a couple other basic things. This line right here does left and right. So I can have this dark pad come out of the left speaker, or the right speaker. And if I command click, it goes right back to the center. And then I also have solo and mute for these kinds of tracks. So I can mute one of them, listen to the other one by itself, or when you have a whole bunch of tracks, obviously that makes a lot more sense. So that's probably enough for the basics of the mixer for right now. This is the inspector, as I was saying, over on the left-hand side. And if I click on a track, I get detailed settings for each track. So in order to see this dark pad virtual instrument again, I would have to make sure that I'm clicked on that track, and then I can hit the little icon, the edit instrument icon, and up pops the virtual instrument. You can make some changes to your virtual instrument and maybe change a patch entirely and then go back to working on it. And then just talk quickly about the tools up top. We've got the arrow tool, as I said, which is the most important one when you're moving around. And if you mouse over objects, that's when you get these little squares that pop up. And then in those, you can grab those little squares and resize things. Or you can grab this square right here, and what it does is it makes a copy just by grabbing it and moving it over. So I'll delete those, but there we go, there's that little dot which gives me that copy as well. I can resize this track to make it a little bit, or this chunk to make it a little bit bigger. So that's the arrow tool, or the object selection tool. I just call it the arrow. Don't worry about range selection for now, but pencil or draw is another way to draw information in. So if you don't feel like playing your drum beat in, you could draw a chunk, go back to the arrow, double click on this, and then start entering in drum information by hand. So let's see, let's find a drum sound here. There we go. So we'll put a little drum beat in. It's going to sound great. So you could draw information in as well. Let's get rid of that chunk. And the eraser tool erases things. The split tool splits things. The glue tool glues them back together. The X tool is for muting things. If you want to try a different version out, you could try muting something and see what it sounds like without that information in it, but you can always unmute it at any time. Or you could cut something and say, what happens if I take the drum beat out at the beginning and just mute it, and then have the drum beat come in at bar 6. And then a couple other icons that are just kind of confusing for right now, so don't worry too much about those. This one feature right here is definitely something you need to get your brain around, and that's called the snap feature. And the snap function is very important because it determines how you move information around on the screen. So with the snap function off, I can grab this chunk of information, I can move it absolutely anywhere, I can resize chunks anywhere I want. But in this case, most of the time I want to have this snap on, which restricts me to moving to certain specific bars. So you can see right now I can only resize things to bars, and that's perfect. So when I cut stuff, I can only cut exactly at bars. What that means is it keeps all of my music exactly on the beat, and when I move things, it's exactly on the beat. And if I want to get more precise, I can change the snap setting right over here to beats. So if I set this to beats, now I can move things out by beats. And if I set it to use quantize, it will adjust to whatever this quantize setting is right here, which is at 16th notes right now. There are times where you want to turn the snap off. So say if you want to have the beginning of a chunk of audio, maybe a guitar strum that comes just slightly before the beat. You don't want to chop that off, so you want to make sure the snap is turned off for that, so you can resize that chunk just a little bit earlier. Anyways, we'll leave the snap on and set to grid, and then I will usually leave this actually set to what is called adapt to zoom. And what this does is as you zoom in, right now it's snapping to 8th notes. If I zoom in more, it's going to snap to 16th notes. If I zoom in even more, it's going to snap to, looks like, 32nd notes. If I zoom way out, it's going to snap to beats. Zoom out a bit more, now we're on half notes, and zoom out more, and now we're on actual bars. This adapt to zoom feature is a fairly new one. I think it was in the last version of Cubase, and it's pretty cool. So you just leave it on and you can kind of forget about it, but just zoom in a little bit more and get more precise with your snap setting. So that is the snap setting, adapt to zoom. That's some basic information about quantizing notes, how to get virtual instruments into your project, and how to start recording so that you can have some fun. So I'll be making some more videos, get you going a little bit further on some of the details of Cubase when you're just getting started. So go to gibbonscreative.ca to check out more about what I do, and subscribe to this channel so you can keep updated when I'm posting new videos. Thanks for watching.